Welcome back to the Boomtown Podcast. I'm your host, Cameron Walker, broker owner of Cameron Walker Realty right here in Huntsville. And I'm here with my co-host, Megan. So welcome, Megan. All right. Glad to have you guys back. Today, we're going to roll into something really cool. If you watched our previous video, we talked about the current market conditions. Today, we're going to talk about how to take advantage of those to your benefit, negotiating whether it's a new construction or a resale home, what we've been seeing out there, the kind of deals we've been able to get for our clients, and some strategies to make sure we get you the best deal. So, Megan, I know this is something like you've been like knee deep in here recently with several of the homes you've had under contract. So why don't you kick us off on it?
Well, the first thing you need to understand is there are two negotiations that happen when you buy a house. This is a resale house. Not, with new construction, it's a little different, and we'll go into that too. But let's start with resale so we can, and there's two negotiations that are going to happen. The first one is when you go under contract. You're going to negotiate for your best price at that point, and then you're going to do a home inspection. And depending on what you find, you have another negotiation that happens where you can either get closing costs, take money off, or get those repairs done. But it's often a negotiation for money at that point as well.
For sure. Yeah. And, people that bought a home in 2020, 2021 may be like, what's a home inspection, right? And so back then, even if you got one, right, and I always advise my clients to get one regardless of whether we think we can negotiate on it, but we need to know. But back then, even if you got one, you may not get any of the repairs negotiated in because there might have been 5 other offers that came in after yours.
Yeah.
So, or they might be holding 3 backup offers, right? So it's amazing in this, to be back on the swing of things where we can negotiate repairs.
Yeah.
And one of the things I talk a lot about in the videos, and we've talked about before, is really depending on what you can get repaired, really comes down to the strength of where you stand in the deal. So things like structural repairs, health and safety, major subsystems, those are baked into our contract. Anything else in our area is really considered cosmetic. That's where a little bit of back and forth happens and where we really have to have the upper hand to get what you want out of the negotiations.
Yeah. And I think that both these negotiations, for me, it comes down to having information, right? I don't have any special trick where I look you in the eye and then you do what I say because I'm so amazing. But if I have enough information, I can present it in a way that's going to benefit my client.
For sure.
And the way that we do this with the home inspection is I like to run it by one of our people we contract out to do the inspection and get it priced.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times what's holding back this negotiation is fear.
Yes.
And they look at this list of things and they say, oh no.
Yeah.
And they throw their hands up and they say, I'm not doing it. And if you can price that out, and we have people that we work with that will do almost everything in a house.
Yep.
And that makes a huge difference because if you hire a different person to do the floors, a different person to do the drywall, a different person to do the paint, the price goes through the roof.
Yeah.
And if you can get somebody in there who can do everything a one shot, it's going to save you money. And if you can price that out effectively during that negotiation, you probably will get that money.
Yeah. So kind of illustrate this point, let's say you have a home inspection. There's 10 items that our buyer want taken care of, right? We put those on what's called a request for repair. We send it over along with the home inspection to the listing agent. They discuss it with the seller. Now, when the seller looks at that, they're not in construction. They don't know. It looks like $100,000 list for them, and it might be a $1,500 list.
Yeah.
So when we go take that extra step, get those quotes from somebody who we would trust to do the work for us or our client, and we have used them frequently in the past, especially recently, then we know that either they can do the work for that price for the seller and we get it, for our client, or we can negotiate the price down or get some concessions from the seller and then our client can do it once they own the home. But again, to your point, and fear's a mile wide and an inch deep.
Yeah.
And people don't realize that laundry list or long list really isn't that big a deal.
Yeah. And people are doing the repairs right now because we're not in that backup offer turmoil. Now it could happen and the market changes consistently.
Yep.
But right now we're getting these things done and it's working out really well for our clients.
For sure. The houses that need that work done are not having the backup offers. The ones that are in great condition, that don't need a lot of repairs, those may have 4 offers depending if they're priced appropriately, right? So we're really speaking to those homes that might need a little updating, 20, 30, 40 years old. And, people's carpet gets worn out, their kids make marks on the drywall, their dog chews up a window. So those things happen.
These are very normal things. And they shouldn't really stand in the way of you finding the house that you want.
Yeah.
And it does mess with the feel. You walk through a house and you'll see these things, but if we can figure out how much this costs and it's something that can actually happen, then you can make that house real pretty. For
sure, absolutely. And in negotiations, you mentioned information being really important. There's another thing for me that's always been important, that is having our next best viable alternative.
Yes.
So if we're going into, say, on the front end and we're negotiating the purchase price and any terms there, if we have another home that my clients are interested in, or that another alternative like renting or staying put, right?
Yeah.
Then the strength's really in our court, because we don't have to buy your house, right? And if we can't come to terms that work for us, we won't. And I actually just ran into this last week. I had clients in town. I referenced them on the earlier podcast where we looked at 30 plus homes, right? And when it came down to it, we had 3 or 4 new construction homes they were seriously considering, and all of them back to ponds. Well, they really wanted a fence. They have 4 kids, 2 dogs. They didn't want anybody running into the pond, right? And the builder they wound up going with no longer does fences. But we were able to negotiate that in and get them to cover the price, because when I told the listing agent, and it was all true, I said, look, we're looking at various options, and my clients really like this house, but if it doesn't have a fence and they have 4 kids and 2 dogs, they're not buying it.
Yeah.
And now I didn't mention that the other 3 homes all have ponds and would also need fences. That's to the information point. But what I told her was true, right? And we got what my clients needed out of it because we had viable alternatives. Had that been the only house on the market and they're already on the way here and they've already got orders to report to work, I would have had to have been a little more soft in the negotiations, because ultimately their goal would have been to get the house rather than to get a house out of these 4.
Yeah. And I think with new construction, if you're willing to put the time in for your client, you can pretty much do that right now, because there's a lot of it available and a lot of it's somewhat similar in these areas. The other thing that I would say in your negotiations with new construction is shoot your shot.
Yeah.
A lot of agents
for sure
don't believe that you can negotiate with new construction, or they'll just accept what the salesperson is telling them. Yeah. Generally, the salesperson is not the decision maker.
Right.
So when you are putting together that contract, you decide what's fair. You decide what your client decides, but you work with your client and then you put in an offer. The worst they can say to you is no.
Right.
And then you can put in another offer.
Right.
The corporate seller of houses is not going to get hurt feelings.
Exactly.
They're just going to accept the offer that is right for them when they get it. There are no feelings involved in this. So shoot your shot.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's a great point to make. Because a lot of times if you go in on a resale home and you go in way under to start the negotiations there, the sellers may react negatively in a way that they're just unwilling to work with you, right? They're offended, which is so goofy to me, because it's just a house. It's a material thing. Mm-hmm. It has a market value, whatever we determine that is, between all parties, right? So there's nothing to be offended about. Yeah, it happens. But on new construction, to your point, nobody's offended. It's just a business decision for them. Did they want to sell one more house at this price? Yeah. And I've had very good fortune this year with getting some pretty decent deals. And every single one of them, the listing agent was pushing back on it. Like, oh, this is our incentive. This is all we offer. This is what we have to give you. And, we're not order takers in that way. Like, we're order takers for our clients and getting them the best deal that we can and being able to negotiate. And sometimes that looks like a grand slam. Sometimes it looks like a base hit. But if we can squeeze things out, then we will. Now, I will say there are a handful of builders in town that they would rather close than take a nickel off their house. Yes. And I know who those are. And I tell my clients that. I'm like, look, this beautiful house. I'm like, we're going to go in and do this. But understand, even if we make a lower offer or ask for more concessions, the likelihood of us getting it are pretty low based on my experience. Yeah. Not that we won't try, but I want to set the right expectations. Absolutely. Versus there's other builders who I swear, like, their sales reps have never learned to negotiate, and you walk in and walk over them.
Yeah. But that's just the thing, is understanding that you're not actually dealing with the decision maker.
Yeah.
And that if you are looking at other houses that are similar and less, there's a very good chance that you can get this house negotiated to that point.
For sure. And then it becomes a little bit of a like, how much can we get off
Yeah.
or how many concessions? And so what's really important in this is doing it like a CMA,
Yeah.
comparative market analysis, but also looking at absorption rate for a builder. So what that is, when you go in and you look at a community and on a monthly basis, how many homes are they selling compared to how many they're building, right? So if you go in a community and they have 20 homes in some various stage of construction, but they're only selling 2 per month, their absorption rate is 10%. They want to be higher than that. They don't want to sit on 18 homes or however they finance them or whatever those costs are. So you're going to have a little bit more power. So then we back out of that community specifically when we look at how much power. Well, what are the other neighborhoods in the area doing? Are they selling similarly priced homes and similarly sized with similar features and upgrades, right? What are they selling for? How many are they selling, right? Because it's a market. There's a hyper local market inside the neighborhood. There's slightly more global outside, and then it gets bigger and bigger, right? But when we're negotiating, we want to do as much apples to apples as possible, especially when we're trying to figure out what we're going to ask for, right? Whether it's price decrease, additional concessions, an interest rate, or all of the above.
Yeah. And the other thing about these new home, it's a short negotiation.
Yes.
You're not back and forth for days. You go in and you figure out what you want and you ask for it.
Yeah.
And they say yes or no.
Right. No, absolutely. Right. So I will say like the fence negotiation, we give two examples here. One, the fence negotiation I had last week, right? It all happened within a matter of like 3 hours. They had the fence priced out with the size fence, the scope of it, the gates, all that, the material, within a couple hours when we were under contract.
Yes.
Now, a couple months ago, I was negotiating and, my clients had started the conversation with the builder before I got involved. And the builder was like, nope, this is the price. That's what it is. Well, they called me and I went in and looked in the MLS and I saw that identical floor plans of this had closed as recently as like 2 weeks before for $15K less. So we weren't going to pay $15K more. Right.
Yeah.
So then it was like going in, but then we had to write the offer. They had to submit it to their manager.
Mm-hmm.
Their manager tried to counter offer us. We stood firm on our offer and we ultimately got it. But that was a couple of days back and forth. Right. Yeah. So it does all come down to what type of negotiation, what you're looking for, and quite frankly, how much the builder wants the business.
Yeah. And how many options your client actually feels like they have.
For sure.
And you don't want to give that away.
No.
You don't want to let them know that this is actually the only house for them.
Yeah.
But in reality, you have more time to negotiate if your client will sit down for a few days and see if they'll come back to the table.
For sure. And having those alternatives, right? Like whether it's staying put, renting, or buying another home gives you that leeway, right? You don't feel the pressure on your side of like, I need to know an answer today. I've got to, if this doesn't happen, my kids don't have a roof over their head kind of thing, right? So if that is the case, then we have to negotiate a little differently. Not that we can't ask, but we got to
never, ever let anyone know that's the case.
Yeah.
That is top secret information.
Absolutely. Yeah. Matter of fact, I think anybody that gives that away should lose their license. And it's probably even within our code of ethics and license law, you're always there to be a fiduciary for your client.
But
and if
you and I both know that we get more information than we should from other agents
for sure.
all the time.
For sure. They should not lose their licenses. I love going up against them. They're great. Please, by all means, represent every seller out there. Yeah. No, 100%. I mean, I've had listing agents basically tell me what offer under asking price would beat other offers. And, I'm not going to lie, this podcast and this YouTube channel has gone a long way to help me with that. There's a lot of agents out there that I don't know, but they know me when I walk in. They've heard this. They see what I do and the types of clients we bring in. And it does gives us one little step up on the run from maybe another agent coming in.
So now let's talk about negotiating a little bit for a resale home.
Sure.
And this is about information as well. You're going to get comps for that home.
Yeah.
You're going to do the same thing that you would basically do if you were selling the home yourself.
Yes.
You're going to do a competitive market analysis, and you're going to you're going to say, hey, how is this priced?
Yep.
And then you're going to look at the house and say, how is it priced for the condition that it's in?
Yes.
And this is going to be the fuel for your negotiation. And when it gets into it and they're coming back at you, you're going to be able to talk about these things and say, hey, my client's going to need to do this, and this. It's going to cost this much. And they have this other house over here that is in better condition, and they wouldn't have to do it.
Right.
But they want your house. So
they were priced appropriately for.
Yeah. So the more information that you have, the better you're going to be able to represent your client in negotiation for a resale home.
For sure. And you mentioned this on a previous podcast a couple of months ago, but that initial walk through the house is so important, right?
Yes.
We can't see what's going on behind the walls. We can't test every single system. We're agents, not home inspectors, but a lot of faults and defects of the home are apparent to the naked eye, right? Or the nose or the ears, depending on what the situation is. So we want to factor in any known conditions, defects, anything like that into that initial offer. Because again, many of those might be considered cosmetic. And once we're under contract, if they do have some strength on their side because of interest in the property, we'd rather have tackled that up front so that we're not negotiating from those from a standpoint of weakness. We want to be on the strong side of it.
Okay. So when you're negotiating on a house with no other offers, now this is what we're describing as I've come in and I've called the agent and they've told me that I am the only one putting in the offer.
Sure.
So then I'm negotiating based on the condition of the house, based on comparable houses.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get the best deal for my client. When I call and they tell me they have 3 other offers, this is done a little bit differently.
For sure.
Yes. So we're still using all this information. We don't want to put our client in a terrible situation where they're buying a house over market value, which is why I always put an appraisal contingency in every offer. But what you're doing at this point is you're trying to compete with other offers.
Sure.
And what's your strategy with this?
So my strategy is to find out what's most important to the seller in those situations. Yeah. So we're doing it right now and have been. We tend to focus on the price being the ultimate thing, but there's so many different factors in a negotiation for a house. There's the closing date, there's inspection contingencies and periods, there's home to sell contingencies, how much money you're putting down, how much earnest money, are you willing, what lender you're using, are they local or is it some no name that's not available after 5 p.m. on Friday? So all of these things go into what we call strength of deal.
Yeah.
And what I want to find out is what components of that deal seem strong to the seller that are not a detriment for us. Where can I give the seller something where I haven't lost anything? It doesn't always have to be a zero-sum game.
Yeah.
And so a lot of listing agents appreciate you coming to them with that question because then they're getting for their client what they want. It's more of a cooperative competition rather than just fierce competition where we're cutting each other's knees off, right? And so as a listing agent myself, if my seller's in that situation and somebody can offer us something that doesn't have monetary value in the contract, but might to my client in another way, like allowing them to move forward sooner or stay in the house longer, or get somewhere before their moving truck gets there, right? All these different things that you don't know about what's going on the other side, you just ask.
Yeah. And that is a big thing is the closing date. Since a lot of people are doing contingent offers.
Yes.
Everywhere in the United States right now. And being able to basically choose your closing date as a seller can be a very big deal and it can be very powerful.
Absolutely. Yeah. And depending to your point, they may be buying something contingent there and it makes their deal stronger because they can close sooner on this side, thus on that side. And they've got to schedule things with their lender, their title company. Money has to move between closings. So if we can be more flexible on our side and achieve what they're looking for, didn't cost us a dime, but got us the house.
The other thing I want to mention is the escalation clause, because I think they're back. There was a point at which everybody was using them, and people would actually say, I don't want to deal with any escalation
Yes.
clauses, which I thought was very lazy and weird. But anyway.
You got it.
But so let's talk first about what an escalation clause is, because some of our viewers might not know. An escalation clause is basically a clause that states that you will exceed the offer of another person by a specified amount and capping at a specified amount.
Sure. So to like put it in numbers, let's say there's a home for sale for $100,000. You make an asking price offer of $100,000, but you have an escalation clause that goes to 110, and it increases by $1,000 increments if triggered by somebody else's offer.
Yes.
Now we're not on the honor system on this. In our escalation clause, it does say that the seller has to provide us the other contract.
Yeah, because the honor system would be foolish.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes they're looking at a contingent offer and trying to get us to escalate past that. Sometimes we will, sometimes we won't, depending on the situation.
Yeah.
So it has to be a bona fide offer. It has to be something that other buyer that we're competing against would be able to deliver upon.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. But it can really make the difference.
Absolutely.
And I've had it make the difference before. I had a situation last year where there were 6 offers, and we got it because we used the escalation clause, and nobody else did.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you have to remember too, when let's say there's 4 offers and the listing agent's showing them to their seller client, they're giving them a net sheet along with that, showing them how much money they're going to net from this offer. So if you're putting 50% down, that's going to lower some of the title cost, thus for both sides of the table. And that's going to mean that even apples to apples on an offer, your offer compared to somebody else's, technically that seller's going to net a little bit more on your offer. And so a lot of people don't realize, like, you can do a net sheet as the buyer's agent for the seller and look at different, like, if we went up this much, how much would it impact their net? Mm-hmm. And I actually used to work with an agent. This is a really good strategy he did. When he made an escalation clause, he made it on the net for the seller. So we would net the seller $1,000 more than the most recent, whatever the next best offer was. And I thought that was really brilliant. It's a little more tricky because you don't know the math of everybody else's offer, but in a hyper competitive environment where there's 10 offers, let's say, not that we see that very frequently anymore, but we do have one right now with 4. That could make all the difference, right? You know, there could be more than one escalation clause, but they see that you're trying to get them to a benefit that others aren't.
And doing all the other things with the escalation clause. You don't just assume that that's going to be what makes it. You call them, you find out what they're looking for. Anything else? Is there anything else that's important to your seller that my client can do to make this work?
Absolutely. And we have some really strong vendor relationships, and that's why we have them. I don't pick the cheapest vendors. I pick the highest quality for the price, right? Values, what's really important. So there are times where maybe having a quicker inspection period, it makes all the difference, right? And that shows a difference in your offer versus somebody else's and makes it stronger. And we can call the inspectors that we typically recommend, lean on them a little bit and get a quicker inspection out of them than otherwise somebody would be able to, because they'll move their schedule around for us, and then we win the deal and you still get your inspection with a quality inspector.
Yeah. And I think that's important. And you can work. I've also done things where I work on that inspection as part of the offer. I've said things like if the price of the repairs is less than $1,000, we are going to cover that.
Yep.
We're not going to, and that lets the seller know I'm not going to be nickeling and diming you, and you're not going to have to jump through a bunch of hoops to sell this house, which is very important to people as well. Yeah,
absolutely. And I mean, the reputation of your lender is really important. Mm-hmm. You can have the lender call the listing agent and say, hey, this person's bullets. I've already pulled their credit. I've already looked at their income. Yep. There's a difference between a pre-approval and a pre-qualification with how much information the lender's already looked at before they issue that letter. And sometimes you're working against a lender's reputation. There were several years ago where I worked with another brokerage. I put in a great offer, and the listing agent immediately called me and said, hey, I know your brokerage is tied with this lender. Are you using this specific loan officer? Because if you are, we are not going to take this offer. And, fortunately we weren't. So it wound up being a non-issue. But, you know, we would have lost that deal had we been. And that person's called me frequently since then trying to get, you know, become a preferred lender for me. And the answer is always no.
Nice. This is great stuff. I think we've covered it, right? Or is there anything else that I think we've covered most of it.
No,
But every negotiation is individual though.
Yep.
So if you have an individual situation and you have questions about it, please reach out.
For sure. Absolutely. Thanks for watching.
Yeah. Thanks everybody.
Thanks for watching or listening. You can always catch us on audio on wherever you get your podcast, be Spotify, Apple, or you can watch our video on YouTube. Really appreciate you guys being here. Ask that you subscribe so we can keep you informed of everything going on here in Huntsville.